So welcome everybody. My name is Mira Blaustein. I'm the co-founder, executive director of the Woodstock Film Festival. So welcome to our COVID-19 edition of our online programming. We started that basically as soon as we had to close our office on March 16th. So we have wonderful two editors. We have somebody just walked behind you.
My husband.
Brian. We have Brian Cates, who cut the pilot for The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and he also did. Gosh, I'm totally blanking now. Brian, you want to?
You wanted to mention The Plot Against America.
The Plot Against America is the most recent thing that Brian worked on. So you guys can definitely watch that if you haven't. And Kate Sanford, who has cut many of the episodes of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She has also done Sex in the City, The Wire, Boardwalk Empire, and both Brian and Kate have worked both on television and on film, which I think at some point in this conversation, I hope that one of you will be able to address the differences. It's okay, we have a little entertaining. That you may be able to address the differences between working on a feature film, whether it's a narrative or a documentary. I don't think either one of you have done documentaries, and a television series. Obviously, these are very different. So I'm going to start with you, Kate, since you and I have spoken about this a little bit. Before you want to address the role of an editor in general as you see it, because you have equated it to different kind of key roles and sort of said what's different about being an editor. Can you talk about?
Yeah, what's different about being an editor than some of the other key roles in collaborative filmmaking is that, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've been working on television for a long time now, and I started in movies, and yeah, we should talk about the difference between them. But I've been thinking lately how interesting it is that, we as editors, that we're there to collaborate with the writers, the directors, our showrunners in the case of TV, but we don't write, with few exceptions, we don't write, we don't direct, we don't shoot. So what is our influence, and what can our influence be as editors? And so I've been talking to classes about this because, it's kind of an invisible art. Sometimes some people call it the invisible art. So the kinds of things we have some control over, are initially by ourselves, usually assembling dailies. We're picking performances before the directors have a chance to come in. We're pacing the show. Sometimes we're choosing music, which is helping to tell a story and guide it in a certain way. And it's really a powerful role, I think, to have the opportunity to present that first impression to your director or your showrunner, especially on television, where they don't really have enough time to kind of unearth and go through every take and everything. Sometimes the dailies a lot better than they do. So, we have many roles, and of course our collaborative and our social skills play a huge part in suggesting alternatives and possibly restructuring or even rewriting after the fact. Once we get in the editing room, we get all the material together. So it's, many people don't necessarily know exactly what we do. And in the case of Maisel, we have a lot to do with the collaboration on pacing, which Brian started off on the pilot. And I just want to say hello to Tim Strito in case he's watching, and even if he isn't, maybe he will later. And everybody should know Tim Strito is really our invisible third collaborator on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Brian did the pilot, and Tim and I cut all the subsequent episodes alternating each one. So Tim couldn't be here because he's finishing a movie at home, but he's here.
That's great, and thank you. I want to take the second part of my question to Brian. Brian, you have edited a lot of films as well as television. And I wonder if you can take a moment and talk a little bit about the difference between the fundamental, I mean, there are a lot of differences, but if you can take one fundamental difference between the two different mediums, what would that be?
Sure. I mean, this is going to sound superficial, but it's really the speed. It's really just the fact that in TV, a lot of what, not entirely, but a lot of what ends up airing could be your first instinct, because there is time to work through your first assembly, and certainly changes are made, sometimes major changes. But when a TV show is operating efficiently, it's really the editor who people are relying on to put the best creative foot forward and have trust that that first cut is going to be close enough to the idea of the show that whatever changes are made to it can happen in a pretty fast and efficient way. I mean, the director has 4 days if they're lucky with the editor, and the producer has maybe another 4 or 5 more, and then it goes to the network, and then they give notes, and it's done within weeks. It's shorter. I mean, we're mostly talking about shows that are about an hour, 50 minutes, but it means that those decisions have to be solid enough that they convey like the totality of what it's supposed to be, and that includes putting in score if it needs score, putting in visual effects if it means putting visual effects. It means really like trying to show something that while isn't done, is like as fully baked as possible in every single stage, so that you're not leaving anything to the imagination. Now, you do that in movies as well, but there's a sense in a movie that it's not really being crafted until the director gets in and gets their hands on it. And you have a DGA contractual director's cut, which is like 10 to 12 weeks or something, where the director's finding the movie with you as the editor. In TV, you don't have that luxury, so it's really up to you to build toward what you think will air, like as soon as you get those dailies, which is actually really fun because there's a marathon kind of aspect to it that gets your adrenaline pumping, but it's also it could be stressful if things are not clicking.
I'm sure you don't have the luxury of sitting there and breathing the material and sitting and discussing and trying with the director and trying this and trying that. I assume that you just don't have that luxury of time to just nurture it.
I mean, you do definitely try things and you do restructure, but often it'll be like based on an email or based on a quick conversation, or like, let's do this restructure in the morning, and then if it doesn't work, take it away by lunch. And in a movie, like, you would sit with it, you'd have a screening, you'd process it, you'd internalize what works and what doesn't work, you'd go home and sleep on it. Right. And with TV, you don't have that. You don't have that.
Right. Well, I have already a few questions.
I'm going to stop my video for 1 second. Come, go.
Okay. I have a few questions from our attendees. So, and I hope that Brian will come back very soon.
I'm here.
Okay, good. I'm not going to ask what happened. So
getting ready for Passover. The apartment is being used for all events.
Okay. Yeah. I have a question here from a colleague of yours. She's a film editor, Sabine Hoffman, and she's asking, and this is for either one of you or both of you. She's asking, could you speak about a big challenge during the work and a delightful accomplishment?
Thanks, Sabine, for the totally open-ended question.
Something that you struggled with, and something that was like this wonderful moment where, it was just perfect.
Well, Kate and I both love cutting to music. I mean, I can speak for you saying that, right? Like,
yes.
Music, like when music and image work well together, it's so gratifying because it feels like complete. I want to say cinema, but it's obviously TV. But like, you want all the elements to work together. And Amy and Dan's show, Mrs. Maisel, is so deeply about the rhythm and the music that you have the opportunity for that kind of pleasure of constructing that kind of pleasure multiple times in an episode. I mean, I only did one episode, but I mean, I'm so enamored with the show and everything that Kate and Tim have built that, like, you can see all of those amazing musical, just not even in moments that don't have music, but just the rhythm of the footsteps and appliances and sound effects. It's an incredible. It is basically a musical.
Right. I have a question from Facebook Live, which is related to what you just spoke about, Brian, and that's again is for either one of you, and that's from Mina Yassin, and I hope I'm not mispronouncing your last name, Mina. When selecting music for a first edit for a project, do you reach the libraries first or turn to the composer commissioned for the final original score?
And this is a question specifically about Maisel, I suppose.
I mean, I think that it would be great if you took Maisel as an example, even though it's not just about this one.
Yeah. Well, I will say, and now I'm going to speak for you too, Brian. I know that a lot of the songs are scripted. Amy and Dan have a very deep knowledge, and they're very particular about what kind of music they hear in their heads when they're writing, and they will often write in a particular song, and I think that was done in the pilot as well. So it usually comes from Amy and Dan, who write all the scripts, sometimes with a writer's room, but really they finalize them. So most of the musical ideas originate with them. Occasionally I can slip in my own ideas, and if I get one, I'm very proud and excited that I got one in. And then we also work with Robin Ordang, our official music supervisor, and she also provides some ideas, especially if we want something specific, if it's you know, like Aloha Night in the Catskills or something like that, or some very particular period background music. She has a deep library for that, but most of it comes from Amy and Dan.
Okay, sounds good. Brian, I have a question for you. I'll see if I can alternate between the two of you. And this comes from Avery Davenport, and he's asking, what are the unique pressures that come with editing a series pilot versus a standalone episode?
Sure. Well, with a pilot, you don't. I mean, in theory, you're looking for the tone of the show and the rhythm of the show and the look of the show. I mean, I have to say, with great showrunners like Amy and Dan, I consider are that you're not really searching for it. They really know what it is, but you are executing it for the first time. So there's the pressure to make it work. But that's no different than a movie. I mean, I have to say, when you come on, I'd say there's, in a sense, more pressure when you're not doing a pilot, because you're part of a team of editors. And sometimes, I mean, when I come in the middle of a show, sometimes I come in as the third editor on a show that has two editors. So I really have to learn the show quickly and completely. And I want to make sure that my position in that sort of assembly line of getting it done is that, you know, I'm as creative as possible, but completely fit within the creative, you know, structures that are already built. You know, I don't want my shows to, I want the material to speak for itself. I don't want to change it. And I don't want to change the rhythm of the work style either. I want to fit into that ecosystem, you know? With a pilot, it's much more like a movie where you're building a community from the ground up. But again, with with really visionary creators, it's not like you're inventing something that is completely formless. Like they have a good idea of what it is, and the script is usually a good you know, a barometer of what that is supposed to be.
I have a related question. Could you tell when you were first approached for the pilot and you read the script and you met with the showrunners, could you tell that this was going to be such a success? Was there something special about it that told you, wow, this is going to be one of the best things I've worked on when it comes to television, at least?
Like completely, but not because I thought it would be popular, because I loved it. I read it and I'm like, I'm doing this. I mean, I didn't interview for it yet, but I'm like, I'm going to try to get this, because it felt very personal to me. I mean, the humor and the whole Ashkenazi Jewish kind of environment, I'm like, I get this and I believe in this. I don't know if I believe in this because it's going to be a hit, but I believe in it because for my taste, I think it's like a good fit, you know? but you never know if it's going to be popular. And I have to say that if you feel that feeling about it being personally relevant to you, there's probably a greater chance that it could be a success, but you can't, that's a very hard thing to control.
Right.
Because that's about networks and marketing and
Yes.
zeitgeist and you know, lots of other stuff. But I absolutely read it and knew it was special, and I really wanted to do it because it spoke to me.
Right. I think that's probably what more what I meant. Did you see the special ingredients in this that it doesn't? I mean, that told you that this is going to be, you know, it's
Yeah.
a good film. It's a good show.
The wit, and also how far Midge goes from the beginning of the pilot to the end of the pilot is real storytelling. Like something happens in that pilot. Like there's a beginning, and it sounds stupid, but there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like sometimes
right.
You get material and you don't really know if those very like essential story beats are there when you read a script. You hope they are, but this was so clearly a good piece of writing. The big question mark was who would play Midge, and I didn't know at that point that it would be Rachel Brosnahan. And when I found out, I didn't know her work. But they were like, "Oh my God, you will not believe it! Like she's the one." I'm like, "Okay, that's great." But I was still a little bit like, "Okay, we're gonna get the first day of dailies. What's she gonna be like?" And I came on board as a true believer as soon as I got footage.
Well, she's fantastic in it. A tiny tidbit, by the way, that Rachel Brosnahan came to the Woodstock Film Festival quite a few years ago with one of the first feature films that she did, and she was very shy and quiet and wonderful and nice and unknown at the time. A lot has happened since. I'm going to ask now Kate a question, and that is from Sarah Pirozek, and she's asking, this is really about the director-editor relationship, and Sarah is asking, as a director, she's a director, I'm curious, when you make the director's cut, you mentioned, and I think Brian mentioned, it's 4 days. How do you like to have your directors come to you with notes? Mm-hmm. And how do you like them to prepare? And do you speak to the director while they're still shooting the episode?
Mm-hmm. So I guess we're talking about, you know, television directors, and you know, I like directors, you know, to come into the room and sit with me. I mean, I think it's the most productive way to work. I like them to come in. I will have had my editor's assembly where I've gotten as far as I can get in the number of days of shooting, plus maybe 2 or 3, if I'm lucky. And then the director will come in, ideally, and sit with me. And if he or she hasn't watched the show, we will watch the show together in the room on the biggest screen we have. And ideally, we will watch it all the way through without stopping. And it's getting to be one of my pet peeves that somehow people don't, they just are so impatient to get going that they want to just stop and talk or stop and dive into a scene at the beginning. And I say, well, can we just watch the whole thing? So I want to get a whole sense of the arc of the story before diving into something that you think may not be working. I mean, we may get to it, but let's see how it goes and what the whole balance of everything is. So ideally they would come in on their first day, we'd watch it together, watch it down, we talk about it as a story, and then we dive in at scene 1, and we'd spend our, you know, break up our 4 days, you know, trying to get through about 15 minutes per day, which is really challenging. And the more that a director wants to dig in and go back into the dailies and look at other performances, these can be very long days. But I think they're, like Brian said, like 4 marathon days, they're astoundingly productive and exciting. And I think even if you presented, you know, a really accomplished assembly, there's nothing like getting 2 people in the room together. And I wanted to go back and say one other thing about the influence, which is that as editors on a series, we have, the other kind of influence we have is that we know the show better than the directors. So, you know, as long as we've been on there for a couple of episodes, so if you have guest directors other than, you know, your Amy and Dan, for example, if they hire somebody to come and direct because they're too busy writing or something, we need to be the people who advise those directors about what the style of the show really is. And directors are very creative and come in with a lot of ideas. Sometimes they'll say, oh, well, let's do a long dissolve, or let's put music here, or let's use score. And so we know the style and the tone of the show, and it's up to us to guide them supportively but gently away from some of these ideas that will never make it, because we just, the rules of grammar have already been established and we don't do that. So that's a great responsibility. And
you're talking about the difference between a director versus an executive producer, a showrunner.
Yeah.
Just to clarify that. Yeah.
Right. So a director for hire, basically. And so those 4 days would be spent with the director for hire, and then they would go away, and then we present their cut to the producers, and then we keep going. And on Maisel, actually, we spend more than 4 or 5 days. I would say we spend an average of between 2 and 3, maybe even 4 weeks sometimes on a cut, just because they're all going at one time. And we have, it's luxurious. That's not true on all shows, but yeah.
I have a related question that I'm gonna ask either one of you, and it comes from Lulwa Curry. I hope I'm not butchering your name. So the person is asking, how much creative freedom do you feel like you have editing scripted TV shows, and can you give an example?
Well, it depends on the show. I mean, there isn't a whole lot of time there isn't a whole lot you can do with changing the script at the assembly stage, and you shouldn't really. I'd say that there, in terms of shot selection, much creative freedom, right, Kate? I mean, like in terms of, often you have directors who actually will shoot not for finding a specific design of a scene, but will shoot more just like to have tons of options and coverage, which is much, which puts it really in our hands to figure out what the design of the scene is going to be. That's not my favorite way to do it, and Maisel is much less like that, because there generally is a design for every scene, and there's a lot of one-take scenes. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you, Brian. It depends. And, like I think you mentioned this earlier, sometimes your assembly, your first instincts are the ones that make it on the air. And as editors, sometimes we're proud of that. Like we'll say, we'll watch with our friends or something and, say, that was my first cut, or that was my first, and you say that kind of proudly, but it represents, your true instincts when you're putting it together and making all the choices. And so, for instance, at the end of episode 201, when Midge and Joel really break up over the phone, that whole scene was pretty much my assembly, and I'm proud of it. I mean, I think anyone who came in would have picked different frames or picked tiny different choices, but I think sometimes our contributions are very small, but they add up to something larger, and there's definitely a part of ourselves in every episode. And I can tell, I'll watch Tim Strito's episodes and they're brilliant, and sometimes he'll make a different choice, let's say staying on the listener when someone else is speaking for a longer amount of time, cutting away for a reaction shot at different times. Those kinds of choices are all very individual and specific. And I think all editors, those are just our different instincts. So we have a lot of influence over guiding the storytelling that way. And then, helping to select music, pulling together the rhythm of the show in particular in any possible ways we can, tightening it. So a million little decisions, come into play.
Right. I have a question that I suppose could go for either one of you, but maybe I'll toss it over to Brian, who's not looking at us right now, but okay, got his attention back.
No, I'm here. I'm just trying to lower the volume of the Seder going on in my house at the same time. That's what happens.
It's from Trisha Holmes. Sorry.
Hi, Trisha.
And she's asking, for a show that is so meticulously planned, has anything ever caught you off guard editorially? And how did you change your thinking, or how did you adopt? Have you caught off guard? Have you caught, caught off guard, rather? Either, I mean, it's for either one of you, but I was first tossing it over to Brian. But if this is a trick question and you guys cannot answer it, we can move on to something.
No, I mean, like, for instance, the Blossom Dearie music cue in the pilot, which is after Joel leaves Midge and she's in shock, and she follows her out of the apartment, and I think goes to the door and probably breathes a heavy sigh. That cue was not in the script. It's something that Amy and Dan, I think Dan actually might have come up with in the editing room. And it's a gorgeous song, and maybe 4 times longer than the piece is that we used in the show. So I had to sort of on the fly music edit it to get it. It's a very short moment. So I had to sort of give the song a beginning, middle, and an end that would be appropriate for that very short, like 20 seconds or something, and fill that entire arc without feeling like it was a fragment or like it was being chopped off. And that had to happen, like, you know, really quickly. So like, it's like, you know, like challenges like that happen all the time, where you're just trying to fit something like that into something like that, or change the tone of something to make it fit into another kind of a sequence.
Right.
I can answer one for Trisha.
Okay.
I think that, you know, when I got the script for 201, which is the first time they go to Paris, and, you know, when you're an editor on a TV series, you get a script, you don't know, you know, you get an assignment basically. So I get my assignment and I looked at the script, and there's just one half of the page is English and the other half is French, right? And I'm thinking, how in the world are they going to shoot this? This looks crazy. How are we going to cut this? Because we're going to need separate audio for each of them. And, you know, because usually you don't want characters talking on top of each other. And how is that going to work? And that's, they going to just mime their words, or what, you know, how is this mechanically going to happen? And I was very pleasantly surprised that, you know, it was mic'd in such a way that, you know, each actor was wearing individual microphones, and we could actually adjust the level of the French translator and of Rachel talking, and we could actually use that audio in a 2-shot so that you could see them both at the same time. And I didn't think that was going to be possible, and it really worked out well. And that Amy and Dan, really, their idea of the scene was that it would get faster and faster and faster, of course, everything's going to get faster, and it would build to a climax where you saw them both on screen at the same time. And my initial pass was to build it the opposite way, so that they were together, and then the cutting was faster, you know, single, individual, to make a kind of rhythm like that. And that's an example where they came in and said, it was Amy came in and said, no, I think they were both there. We want it the opposite way, actually. We want to build to a climax where we see them both on screen together. And I wasn't sure that was going to work. And then I just did it, and it was great. And they were right, and it worked really well. And we were able to use almost all the original audio that was recorded, not have to, you know, I was also afraid we would have to like replace a lot of dialogue after the fact, have the actors come back, but so I was pleasantly surprised.
Is there, Kate, are there any split screens in that for pace to make it more, to overlap it even more?
No, not in that. Yeah.
I'm just going to add that that particular show, Simone was nominated for an Emmy. So congratulations.
Thank you.
I have a question here that is, Sarah Pirozak again is asking, and she's asking, this is really an advice from an editor to a director, and it's for either one of you, and it's in general, it's not just necessarily about Mrs. Maisel. And she's asking, other than the obvious setups, what kind of coverage is indispensable? Meaning, like, what would you tell a director that you really have to provide to the editor so that they'll have the kind of film that they want to have, or a TV show that they want to have? Is there any rule of thumb that you could, as an advice that you could give the directors who are listening? Either one of you.
It's a hard question because anything can work if it's done well. So, I mean, the kind of rules, like you want non-overlapping dialogue so you can overlap it yourself, and you want to have a clean close-up so that you don't have to worry about the other character's lip flap if you change the timing of the lines off screen. But like, the truth is, and all of those, none of those things are important. The only thing that matters is the storytelling interesting and, you know, and vibrant and, you know, and draws you in. So like, you know, like with Mrs. Maisel, we have scenes that are literally one shot, or I should say the pilot we did, and in the show it's clear, I think, as well. And there isn't coverage, but there are huge numbers of choices that you can make in terms of what dialogue, what line of dialogue you're using, what if you're replacing dialogue. There are pacing things you could do within a shot, within a oneer, speeding up and slowing down things, split screen. I mean, things that, you know, not really tricks, but like things to sort of pace it up even within a shot. So the answer is it depends, you know?
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions that I want to bring up, and then I can let you join the Seder. Brian? Okay, he's going to come back to us. So that question again is for the two of you, and it's more general in terms of film and television, rather than particularly Mrs. Maisel's. And that comes from Sarah Corrigan, who's asking, how does one transition from feature editing to television? And she says, especially if you cut from home, which I know you guys don't normally do, but if you can address that. Transition from feature editing to television. And either one of you.
My story might be a little different than today, because I just got lucky over 20 years ago when nobody was doing any television, and in New York, because we're both New York based, and there just wasn't television in New York, and somebody was looking for an editor on a new show called Sex and the City, because one of the editors had to go on to do a feature. So there was just a slot open, and I had sort of heard a buzz about this, and I said, oh, I should do that. That's going to be something interesting. And so I got my foot in the door in television really early. But I think that I think there's a lot of television production in New York. I mean, I don't know if it's that much of a problem, but I think that, you know, networking with other editors and people on your crew is always the way to continue to advance your career. And I think that is the same with, you know, making a lateral move from features to television or back again, and just persevering and getting your work out there and getting the word out to anybody that you can. Just networking. I think most work comes through word of mouth, not necessarily through an agent. And it comes from just doing the work and being around people who are going to go do the next thing. So, I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, it definitely, I mean, agents are helpful for a lot of things like financial making deals and stuff, but really it's who you know in your network, even much more actually. And relationships that build on previous jobs. So sort of the community that you're in is going to be the community that hires you later. So if you want to make a move, it's important to take a position. It may not be the perfect position, but to be in the community of people who will hire you later. Even if it's a temporary position or just sort of getting your feet wet in, you know, if it means becoming an assistant or staying an assistant, or if it means just sort of networking in that community. It's you know, it's really who you know.
Right. Like if you want to make a move, but you have an opportunity to go to reality television, and that's not where you want to be, that may not be as helpful to you as working on a scripted show that you don't love, but at least you're in the scripted world.
Yeah.
I want to ask you guys a question before I move on to a couple more questions in a Q&A list. For both of you, just take your turn. If there's any particular endearing anecdote from the time that you have worked on the pilot of Brian, and you can even include the premiere that you attended for that, as well as you from the whole time that you've been working on Sex and not Sex in the City, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel's. Can you select one particularly endearing anecdote that you can share with us that will be something that has touched you, something that you remember fondly? And it doesn't have to be about the process of editing. It can be just about your experience with the whole thing, or a part of that experience. Anything comes to mind from either one of you?
I can't think of a specific one. I just remember how much Amy and Dan like to have the family of the crew be sort of like, I don't know, entertained by each other, and like you know, we had like a wrap party for the post production, which you don't always do. Like there's a wrap party for the shoot. I mean, that's conventional, but I mean, to take us out to a really adorable bar in the West Village, and you know, and have cocktails and just to feel like this honestly very short job. I mean, for me, it was an 8-week job, I think, which is nothing compared to a feature. But to feel like that community cares about each other, and even if the show isn't going to get picked up or isn't going to be understood or known or a hit, that moment was that there's something special and magical about that community in that moment. They really like to create that environment, and it's a very strong memory for me now.
Yeah, they're very generous, and I will say they'll have kickoff cocktail parties before each season. They'll have elaborate table reads for each episode where the entire crew is invited, and this is the first time I've ever been on a show in the 20 years I've been doing this that the whole crew is invited to the table read, and it gives just a very inclusive, warm family feeling. And also it's nice there isn't such a tremendous wall up between you and the actors. I mean, they're still the actors, the cast, but there they are. But you're sitting around a table with them and listening to them read the script, and invited to laugh and participate and then mingle afterward. So it is very generous, and our Dana Gilbert is our producer, and she's tremendously generous with everybody. She helped bring me and Tim into the process and introduced us to Amy and Dan. So we're still very grateful.
Thank you. I mean, that's really kind of what I wanted to hear. So I'm gonna, I think, address a couple more questions and then let you guys go. This one is from Mina Yasin, who I think asked us something earlier, and she's a composer. So she says, she's asking, I've worked on projects for HBO, etc. And so I'm curious how you find music. And that may be just for anything that you've worked on, not necessarily on Mrs. Maisel. How much creative freedom do you have with selecting music? For example, is there a specific library that your choices need to be selected from for the rough first cut, as well as for later in the process? It's for either one of you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I'll just give a quick answer. I mean, we have a great opportunity on projects where there will be a score, for example. I think we're talking about score. On projects where there is a score, which would exclude all of David Simon's projects, pretty much. But other things, movies and a couple other TV shows, we usually try to select pieces of music from other movies, other TV shows that have a similar tone, and we temp those pieces in, and we try to shape the story with those pieces of music. And then when a composer is hired, or if we know that composer will be hired, we will use his or her music possibly, or ask them to contribute some things. So we do work with temp music for quite a while, and then give it over to the composer, and then have ideally a spotting session where we talk about where music should start and end and why and what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to make you feel. And it's a really important part of the process. And I think picture editors have a great hand in that. A lot of freedom. Yeah, right.
Yeah, we do.
Great.
And sometimes I find rarely I'll put something in that was not necessarily even a musical moment in the script, and it'll never even be questioned through the process, and it'll end up in the mix without even it being an issue, which to me, I think that's a great, like the greatest compliment for it to never have even, it's almost as expected as if it was written, even though it wasn't.
Yeah.
Of course, someone has to pay for it, so that's when that's when it's dealt with. But that happens with the with the skills of music supervisors, who are essential.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to, I think this is going to be the last question. And for those of you who I wasn't able to get to, I apologize. I think most everybody here has gotten to ask at least one question. So this is from Sarah Higgins, and she says, this is for both Brian and Kate, just take your turns. And it's a general question. What kind of jobs did you do earlier in your career that prepared you for your current career, for your current job as an editor? Either one of you can start. Brian, you're on, so why don't you start?
Sure. Well, I was an assistant editor, which is hugely important. I don't know if that's really the question. I did a film or two where I was a post coordinator on very low budget films, which was really helpful because it was the position that was needed, but not a position I really knew how to do. But I was thrown in head first and had to figure out what were the logistics around post-production that needed to be accomplished. And that way I had a sort of a head start in understanding where it all was leading in the pipeline. It's not just about cutting the dailies, it's about getting all the way to the final mix, the final visual effects, final answer print. So like I had a sense of the beginning to end, which I wouldn't have had if I hadn't, sort of been recruited into being a post coordinator. Before that, I worked in a bookstore, which did not prepare me, but was fun.
Kate, is there anything?
After college, I landed a job as a post PA on a movie that was already shot. And as soon as I went down the hall and saw the editing room, I just kind of knew that's where I wanted to be because it looked like a dark room. I had been really interested in photography, and I had a dark room when I was growing up. And so I did photography on my own. But I didn't, other than that, and working on set as a set PA, which I couldn't wait to get off of this. I just can't stand being on set. Being on set taught me what everybody's job was. And I would, each day, each week that went by, kind of eliminate those possibilities. No, I don't think I want to be on camera. No, I don't think I have the patience to be a script supervisor. No, I don't think I can do this. But, just walking by the editing room, that looked like the exciting, that looked like the mystery and the exciting place that I wanted to be. And it was also very intimate because there aren't that many people in there, but it looked like very important, exciting work. So then as soon as I graduated from college and I had a chance to actually get my foot in an editing room, I didn't leave that. Like, I've just been there as an apprentice, an assistant, and then made the jump to be an editor. So I don't know, it was kind of on instinct,
Yeah. I think I lied. I'm going to ask one or two more questions because I just don't want to disappoint the people who are attending. If you guys can just stay with us for
it's fine.
5 more minutes, and you can keep the answers short. So we have a question here from Matthew Dixon. He's watching it on Facebook Live, and he's asking, when learning editing, what's the best way to structure how you practice? Should you just jump into it or learn different theories one after the other, such as jump cuts, cross-cutting, etc.? This is very specific, but and one of you can grab that one, whoever wants that.
I think you should just jump into it.
Okay.
You know, I think you should just jump in and try to tell a story. I think that's the most important thing. And in trying to tell a story, you will develop techniques in order to tell that story, and that's where those ideas will come from. But I don't think you can say, like, I'm going to take some footage and practice doing a jump cut. You know, unless you want to be an experimental filmmaker, you want to do something different. But in terms of scripted narrative work that we do, it's about telling a story clearly in an interesting way and watching that develop. And I think you just have to do it if you're lucky enough to, you shoot something and you're putting it together. You just have to cut it and put it together. And sometimes, this is not really a plug, but I sometimes teach at the Edit Center when we're not in a pandemic. And I think it's really nice to learn in person with real footage and have a chance to work with other people and collaborate, because not only do you start editing, but you start working, you know, collaboratively.
Right.
That's such a big part of it.
I have one last question that I'm going to ask you, and so I find, I mean, it's kind of funny, but not really. And this is from Lin Chen, who says, I'm married to an editor who works all day in a dark room.
Yeah.
Not sure what your setups are, but do you have any lighting decorating recommendations to make the room less depressing?
Oh.
Definitely. You definitely need non-fluorescent lights, and a lamp with a colored shade is a good idea. Flowers are a good idea. Scented room spray is not bad. A candle. What am I missing? Artwork too. Actually, artwork is important. I mean, it's good to sometimes, occasionally, like I think about the theme of the project I'm doing, and I try to order artwork or posters that are not necessarily movie posters, but are just inspire the theme and feel like make me feel like I'm in an environment where I want to think about those ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Brian, have you ever been to you've been to our Maisel cutting rooms at Steiner, right?
No, I've never been.
Yes, they are painted, you know, they are decorated in a Maisel style. And we also, you know, we kind of collect some still frames at the beginning, and we ask our art department to print these giant posters out of stills, and we plaster the editing room hallways and our rooms sometimes with inspiring images. So when we come into the building, when everybody comes to visit us, and when Amy and Dan come, they're already, you know, thinking about Paris, and we have a big Eiffel Tower or whatever, so we get in the mood. I don't work at home as much, but I try to keep my environment a little bit free of visual distraction. Not ugly, but like a little bit plain for me. But never fluorescent lights. If there are fluorescent lights in any room, no one is allowed to turn them on, ever. It's horrible. Yeah, so nice lighting. Nice lighting is really important. And also go outside. You got to go outside. I don't always remember to go outside, but if you're working in a dark room all day and you're looking at a screen all day, you've got to stand up. Standing desks are good. We have them now. But go outside and take a walk and come back. It's important.
Advice.
Get some sun.
I have one last question I have to ask because it is so relevant, and it's brief. And that comes from Andy Ralph, who's just asking, how has COVID-19 affected the way you work? So, I mean, this is something that we all now obviously very much impacted by. How has it impacted you guys?
I'm not working. I was going to be teaching, and I'm not working, so I'm just taking an extended break, and I'm hoping Maisel will come back whenever there is a protocol for people to get together and shoot. Yeah.
Are you hearing from them? Is there any? What are they thinking? What are they saying? Is there anything?
There's nothing. There's nothing to report yet. We're all keeping close. We actually had a Zoom kind of call today just to say hi to each other, and we don't know.
Right.
Yeah. We were supposed to start kind of the beginning of June, but I doubt that could, I don't know, we'll see.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm on a break, and my husband, who's an editor, is working here from home. We're upstate, and it's okay, but it can be a little cumbersome. You have to work remotely with your directors and things, and your showrunner, and that can be a little awkward.
What show is your husband Gary working on?
On The Good Fight, which premieres tonight.
That's right. Okay, so if anybody can watch The Good Fight, you know the editor by osmosis. He's Kate's husband. Brian, do you want to share anything in terms of how the pandemic has affected your work?
Sure. I've been working on a documentary that luckily was able to be portable, so I'm working at home. You know, as you can hear, like, you know, I'm sharing, you know, my husband is also working. So we have separate spaces, but no wall separating us. So we both use headphones. You know, I'm just grateful to have a job, to be honest. I mean, I love the film that I'm doing, but I'm also just grateful to be among the very few people who have jobs. And as long as it lasts, I'll feel that way. That some of the technical issues are just around media management of not, you know, we did have a shared media system when we were in an office. Now we don't, so we have copies of media, and you know, we use Dropbox and stuff to mail bins back and forth, and sometimes mail media, which takes a long time to upload. But it's nothing that complicated. And the truth is, I'm just like Zoom. I'm happy that there's technology that makes us feel like we're among people and not isolated.
Mm-hmm.
It's a terrible time, and I'm actually just happy that there's a structure to the day. That's the best thing about work, is that there's work. There's stuff that needs to be done.
Right. No.
Besides wiping down groceries.
Yeah, same for me. Okay, well, on this note, I'm going to bring this to an end. I can't thank you guys enough. Brian and Kate, you were so generous with your time and with everything that you shared with us, the information. Really, really appreciate it. For everybody who joined us, all the attendees, thank you so much. If there's anybody if I didn't get to your questions, I'm sorry. There were a lot of them. And come back and join us next week. We're going to do a whole other talk with the director and cinematographer and producer of the new film Swallow, which is now on Netflix, I believe, if not Amazon Prime. I believe it's Netflix. It was released by IFC. It opened at IFC Center in New York City for just a couple of days, and then all the theaters had to shut down, and so they put it online. So it's a wonderful film. I hope you'll join us. And Brian and Kate, again, thank you so much. Happy Passover. Enjoy your Seder.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Okay.
Take good care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for letting us do this.
Thank you.
Bye.